This course is all about making data-driven web pages in SharePoint. But let's face it, one of the benefits of SharePoint is that we often don't think about web pages all that much. And what I mean by that is if I say that I want a contacts list on a website, I simply create that list. I go into the Site Actions menu, I create the new list, I select one of the templates or I define my own and I give it a name. SharePoint will take care of generating the web page to display that list, the web page to add an entry, the web page to edit it, as well as taking care of all that information in its own database, and it will do that automatically. And that's because SharePoint is already focused on creating web pages that show data, and that can help us a lot. Now, we have this key phrase when we're working with data in SharePoint and in SharePoint Designer, the idea of a data source. And all that really means is exactly that, a source of data, a location of data. That data could be tiny, that data could be huge. It could be from an Oracle database, SQL Server, Access, a web service, an XML file, could be on the same server, could be on a server on the other side of the world. It's all just data sources. Now, here's the thing. The SharePoint lists and libraries that all our sites are made of are automatically considered to be data sources in SharePoint Designer. In fact, if I select the lists and libraries option here, I can see my lists, I can see my libraries. If I click the option that says data sources, it looks pretty much identical, because all those lists and libraries are already data sources in SharePoint Designer. And what this means is we can use the existing SharePoint lists to experiment with creating custom pages and playing around with formatting and web parts without having to worry about database connections and authentication and credentials and all that stuff until we're ready. So working with the existing lists and libraries in SharePoint is a great way to get started with this. So let's do it. What I'm going to do is make a page here and tell it to show some data from an existing SharePoint list. So I'm going to jump to the Site Pages section and tell it to create a new web part page. I'm going to select the simplest option again, just the single column. I'll give this a name of simpledata.aspx. Again, be careful that you do give it the .aspx suffix, that's essential. Single click it, we jump through to the settings page. This is where I might change the file name later if I needed to. I'm ignoring everything else here. It's just simply telling me that it's using the same permissions as the parent, which is the site, which is fine. And I'm going to select the edit file link. Now, like many web design tools, you have different ways to edit these web pages. Down towards the bottom in SharePoint Designer here, I'll see this Design Split Code button. This gives you the choice of the design mode, which is the kind of what you see is what you get view. You can switch to code view and actually manually start to edit the tags that this page is made of. Or you can do split view, which is a little bit in between. Now, if I were doing a branding course and really focused on customizing the HTML, we might spend a lot of time in code view. But to be honest, I'm going to prefer to spend as much time as possible in design view in this course. Even if you're super comfortable working with HTML, you'll find that it's much easier to work with the SharePoint specific parts using the design mode. Again, as I mouse around, I get this no entry sign. That's because most of what we see here is coming from the master page, which describes the general look and feel of the site. And with this web part page, there's really only two areas that I can edit. There's an area up here in the top part of the page, and then there's this main section here. This is the one I'm really interested in. This is the main placeholder for my content. This is the container that's just waiting for me to fill it out. I can click in and I could start typing anything that I wanted here, but that's not really what I'm wanting to do here. Now, if you don't want to get confused with the rest of the master page, one of the things you can do with this main section selected is over here on the right, you have the little arrow glyph. And one of my options here is zoom to contents. What this allows us to do is just focus on that specific container that we're filling without seeing any of the extra navigational stuff. I don't really need to do that right now, but that's fine. Zoom to contents is just simply a toggle. So I'm going to click zoom out and go back out here. It doesn't change what you're allowed to do. It just changes what it looks like. Of course, I don't want a page with fixed static content. I don't want to type anything manually in here. I want to show some dynamic data. So I'm clicking in this section, and then up on the ribbon, I'm going to click the section that says Insert, and we're switching to this Insert part of the ribbon. I can insert some classic things like a table and a picture, but it's over in this section that's more tempting. Now, I might rush ahead and see data source and think, that's what I want, but no, this isn't it right now. I'm more interested in this section, the data, views, and forms area. These are the pieces that show data. I can mouse over each of these to see a little bit more information. The display item form inserts a form that displays the data for a single item, okay? And then we've got a new item form and an edit item form. But really, this one here is the one that should be flashing and twice the size of the others. This is the most important one here, the button that says Data View. Inserting a view that displays data from a data source. Remember that our SharePoint lists and libraries are already defined as data sources. We don't need to describe anything more about them. So when I click this, it's actually saying, okay, where's the data coming from? And it's showing me the lists and the libraries that it knows about. I do have an option for more data sources, but we'll see that later. Now, I've added a few tasks to my task list on this site, so I'm going to pick that one. And what we're doing here is SharePoint Designer is adding a web part, a reusable, customizable, self-contained, intelligent chunk of content that in this case is talking to the database that stores the task list for this site. And it's actually reading that data right now from the task list. Now, the web part that we've just added has the rather long-winded name of the XSLT list view web part. You can see that, or at least the start of it, on the handle of the web part here, XSLT list view web part. This is a new web part in SharePoint 2010. In SharePoint 2007, there was something called the Data View web part, which was similar. Now, that still exists, but it's been replaced by this XSLT list view web part, which is a lot better and a lot more customizable, as we'll see shortly. Now, what I'm going to do is just save this page. I'm going to jump up to the floppy disk icon at the top here and click Save. And then I'd like to actually preview this in the browser and take a look and see if it works. In fact, the shortcut here is just hitting the F12 button. And I can see that this is already working. Looks like a classic SharePoint. I can actually see these options here. I get the drop-down arrow. In fact, it looks kind of like the page I might expect to see when I'm looking at this list. I don't have the quick launch bar on the left, but that's just the default way that site pages are created. And we're getting all this extra stuff, all the navigation, the search box, the title, the site actions menu provided by the master page, which is why I'm not going to touch that. Closing that down, going back into SharePoint Designer. Now, it's easy to think of web parts as kind of small and insignificant, kind of boring, kind of fixed, but make no mistake, this XSLT list view web part is deeper than most, if not all of them. It's not some restricted feature. In fact, this is the same web part that you've been using, whether you knew it or not, on almost every standard list and library page in every SharePoint 2010 site. And as we'll see, it's a lot more powerful than most people think it is.